Have you ever eaten at the McDonald's on Bronte Road, aka Highway 25 in Milton? It's the McDonald's just south of the 401. I was seated there recently, and the table I was at, I was looking east through a window. Think of it. What is it that I would see? What is it that you would see? You are right. It is the Maplehurst Correctional Facility. Have you ever been in a jail, one way or another? Hard to imagine what daily life must be like in such a place as Maplehurst. But I'm sure that it is a much better place to be, far better than the jail mentioned in today's Bible reading, where Paul is a prisoner. He's a prisoner there because he proclaimed the message of Jesus. Paul had not committed any crime. He was not a bank robber or murderer. He was there because he spoke of Jesus. Now you maybe think to yourself, oh, that's back in Bible times. It's not. It happens today. The highly respected Christianity Today magazine tells us the top 10 countries where Christians are persecuted. And this list is from last year. North Korea, Somalia, Yemen, Eritrea, Libya, Nigeria, Pakistan, Iran, Afghanistan, Sudan. Oh, I miscounted 11. Is India. And there are many more beyond that 11. The group Open Doors gives us even more information on Christian persecution today in the world. Open Doors figures that 360 million Christians last year lived in countries where persecution was significant. I was amazed to read that approximately 5,600 Christians were murdered. More than 6,000 were detained or imprisoned, and another 4,000 were kidnapped. In addition, more than 5,000 churches and religious facilities were destroyed. And some of those churches were right here in Canada. So Paul's writing today is not out of date. It's as today as the news is. We read. So Paul begins our reading reminding the Ephesian believers and reminding us that he calls himself a prisoner in the Lord. What we need to hear, however, is Paul sees his frequent stays in jail, in prison, were never without a purpose. We're never without a purpose. What a lesson here. Paul does not simply refer himself as a prisoner, but this prisoner in the Lord. And there's a huge difference because he saw in prison there were purposes and possibilities. You and I might consider such a time imprisonment a total waste because it inhibits our freedom from what we want to do. But Paul sees this situation from a different perspective. For Paul, even confinement does not diminish his mission to tell people about Jesus. Paul reports this in the church. In the letter to the Philippians. And it helps spread the message of faith. He used his time writing, for example, letters that we read today. And that was all not on the paper we think about today, with the pens we think about today. He didn't send a text or an email. It was hard going. When we make a mistake, we simply backspace we clip and delete. He had to redo it. But he saw it with a purpose. How, we ask, can this be? Locked up in a cell, what purpose is there in imprisonment? Perhaps there are lessons for us that might be drawn when we find ourselves in situations that are restrictive of what we want to do. Probably most of us will not ever be in a prison, but there are situations that imprison us. And they may seem to be an incredible waste of time in situations. And what can we do to use them? What can we do to use them? We read stories of people being caught on tarmacs in airplanes for hours and hours and hours till they take off or deplane. I can think of that as you're in a metal prison and you can't get out. How can you use that time? You may be in a work situation that feels at times like you're in prison. You may be in relationships that feel like that. Now, have you ever been to a place here in Ontario called Creemore? And this is not confessing you were at the brewery. For 7 years, I worked at a farm in Creemore, and that was back before Creemore was famous for the brewery that bears its name. Back in those days, Creemore was famous for the little lockup. It was a tiny, tiny jail, constructed in 1892 at a cost of $425. And it was 4.5 by 6 meters. So maybe this space here, it wasn't big. It's considered the smallest jail in Ontario, and maybe one of the smallest in North America. But inside that space, there's 3 cells. Now the jail is open, it's free to visit. The cells display the jail's small but mighty history in Creemore. It was used as a jail to 1940, before closing and reopening as a tourist attraction in 1972. Now, I was locked up in that smallest jail once. Oh, now you're really listening. I was an angel. It was a promotional stunt for our home church, that we were locked up there as a fundraiser, and you had to sponsor us to get us out. But even so, even though I knew my release date, time, even though it had a great purpose, I felt I was caged in. I was confined. So what does Paul's imprisonment teach us? One scholar says, first, we should never limit Christ's presence and power to places we typically regard as holy and sacred. So we should not think that Jesus just works at the church or in Bronte Hall or when we're drinking that right coffee after service. No, Jesus works in any situation. Jesus can be at work. We might think divinity goes hand in hand with wealth, splendor, influence, and comfort. But that's not the message of this story or the message of the Bible. Jesus is not just for the 1%. Jesus is for the 99 and the 1%. Jesus is for all people. The writer reminds us God shows up where on December 25th? in a manger, not in a palace. Who were the first to hear of what took place in that stable? They were not the wise men, wealth, power, privilege, authority, but the shepherds. Jesus was regularly accused of hanging out with sinners. Who were the first people to share the story Jesus was no longer in the tomb, but resurrected? It was women. And in that culture, in that day, they weren't even considered reliable witnesses. Sometimes we think we are limited because of who we are. But God sees us in a very different way than we may see ourselves. God can use us. God can use us for purposes when we are free as a bird to fly anywhere, or we are imprisoned. Now, as I was writing this message, during the first day of Walton's summer vacation Bible school, and it was incredibly heartwarming the whole week. What a blessing. But I think an example, the junior leaders, helping the younger campers learn the songs, the actions, the lessons. I was working away, trying to get ahead in my summer sermons and services. I took a break writing when a teenager working in the kitchen under Nicole brought me some snacks that they had made for the message at Vacation Bible School. See, the snacks connected with the teaching. On this Monday, the snack was a wooden shish kebab made of alternating red and green grapes stuck on the stick. At the end of the stick was half a strawberry with 2 chocolate chips for eyes. I immediately thought it was a snake from the Garden of Eden, the story in the Hebrew Scriptures, one of the creation stories. God can use any situation. Those simple ingredients, those teenagers working in the kitchen. Well, the second learning from Paul's imprisonment is worth noting that stays in prison can often hone our understanding and insight. When you have been forced to just be, rather than be a human doing, to just be. It sometimes sharpens how we see life. What Paul is writing to the Ephesians is words of counsel and confidence in living out the faith. Paul says, be completely humble and gentle. Be patient. None of us need that. Bearing one another in love. Those words never become stale. What one of us could not do with more patience? You see, there's a conflict in the Ephesian church. Some of the Ephesians had been former Jews. Some of them had been former Gentiles. And the two groups had come together with a faith in Jesus, but they had friction between them. And Paul is saying, work on unity. Be that body I talked about in the youth story. Make sure the parts are working together. Don't be divided. Have a union. Focus on Jesus, Paul would say. Not where you came from. Not if you came from a correctional facility or the Ritz-Carlton. Focus on Jesus. Not the difference between each other, but what you have in common. I end this message with correction to my earlier illustration. The one I used earlier about VBS. Later, I was told that delicious VBS treat was not a snake after all. I thought it was a snake from the Adam and Eve story. One of the other teens corrected me. It was a camping caterpillar. The caterpillar was even a better message. You know, the butterfly life cycle symbolizes the life of Christ. The caterpillar, or first stage, stands for Christ's life on earth. The cocoon stage portrays Jesus' death at the cross and his burial. And the third stage, the most important, is the rebirth after 3 days with his resurrection. The butterfly's final stage is not only a right symbol for Vacation Bible School, but for Easter and for the living out of our days in relationship. We are people of the resurrection. We are here because we believe Jesus lived, died, and rose again.